Welcome back to part six of our series of building an Excel custom function add-in, right? So we are now moving on into the actual building of the physical add-in that you see when you would, open Excel ideally. And we've seen that most of us are going to be coming from a VB8 background. We have a lot to learn, obviously, but it's not too bad once you kind of understand the overall structure of how the files are organized and really what is each file intended to do. Really, that's how you kind of have to start thinking about it when you start going into this is what is the purpose of the file? What is it trying to do? Once you understand its purpose, at least then you know, okay, where do I need to go if I potentially need to fix something? But then naturally, once you're inside that file, you're going to have to understand the syntax of using that particular language. So again, don't beat yourself up if it's one of those things where it's confusing. It's going to be confusing in the beginning. So just take it one step at a time, one line at a time, play around, break it, all that kind of fun stuff. Okay, so now what we're going to talk about is just modifying my header a little bit, and then we're going to jump into actually coding a function that we can use. So right now, you can see I have my header, and then we have our main body. I don't like how high my header is. It's too high. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to change this particular size. Now, where do I change it and all that kind of fun stuff, right? Well, it's not too confusing, actually, once you kind of take a step back and look at how the HTML code is organized, because naturally, the first thing you should be doing is saying, okay, well, what is the element I want to edit? In this case, I want to edit my header. Okay, well, where does that exist inside of my HTML code? Well, if I go down to line 26, I'm going to notice that there's a class that is Microsoft Welcome Header. Okay, that's probably a good point to start. So then now that I have my quote unquote class ID, then I'm going to go back to my CSS file. And then from here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to look for that particular class. And luckily for us, it's actually right at the top. And so if I look here, I notice that it's denoted by a little period in the beginning. So if I do period, and then with this class name, it will actually modify this. And so if I want to change the height of it, well, there's a couple of different things I can do. Now, for the most part, I don't want to touch any of this stuff because this is actually dictating how things are going to be flexing. So as I go and move this in and out and all that kind of stuff, these lines are dictating that. Additionally, any of the items inside of my header are now being aligned. So if this one, if I do, what is it? If I do flex start, right? Now it's gone to the start, right? So it's changing its alignment based on what I'm telling it to. Additionally, I can do, where is it? Stretch. I've never done stretch, so I don't know what that will do. Apparently didn't do anything. But by default, it's going to be center. So that's a way where you can actually line the items inside of your header. There is some padding. So this is basically the thickness of the padding area. And so in this situation, it's kind of like the spacing around it. That's kind of how I like to think about it. I think that's, you usually want to have padding because, just say, for example, you put this at 0 pixels. Let's just see what would happen. Naturally, when you start doing this stuff, sometimes you just kind of need to play around with it. So if I change that to 0, it didn't look like it did much. It does do stuff, I will tell you that. If I change this, what happens? So you notice like it's changing it little by little, right? So for the most part, obviously, if I want to change the height of my particular add-in, it looks like I should be changing this little guy right here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do 60 and see how that looks. Okay, that's good enough for me. I just don't want it taking up too much of the screen. I just want it to have enough where people can see it. And then there's some other stuff. There's the welcome main header 2. So this is saying whether it should be aligned to the center, and the width of it. So these are just defining the actual style of those particular elements that belong in a particular class most of the time. Now, this is the one that we defined up above. So this was changing the header here to white. Now I could also do font weight equals, I don't know, let's do 900. Okay, so now you can see it's a little bit thicker. And then I might want to do font family. So maybe I want to do, oh, look, they got Helvetica. Can I do Helvetica? Oh, I like that one. Ooh. So now, that's kind of neat. I didn't even know. So that's kind of changing the overall style of the font. By default, it's Seago. So that's the Microsoft font. For the most part, I think Seago looks fine. I mean, they usually do a pretty good idea. They have usually a pretty good way of organizing and stuff like that. But, this is just a way where you can easily modify it. Again, we'll talk, later down the road about things you can do to make your life easier in the sense of styling it and, making it where it's more consistent throughout. There's actually like themes that you can do. And then property is experimental. Be cautious when using it. Oh, that's exciting. Yeah, okay. Well, that's enough for that font. It's margin. You can have a background color if you want. So say, for example, I want to make it like aqua. Now I've made it aqua. Obviously, it doesn't look great because now it just stands out like a sore thumb. There is a border radius, border top. I've never done this one, so I don't know if it's gonna, okay, so it looks, no, it didn't do anything. But you can add borders to it if you want to. And that's kind of just in general, using the CSS file to style it. I mean, obviously, depending on what you're trying to style, it's gonna really dictate how you write the CSS. The problem is, naturally, there's so many ways to do it, and naturally, just the variety of add-ins that are out there, you just generally have to have an understanding of kind of how it goes about and what your options are. But I think Visual Studio Code does a pretty good job of kind of guiding you in the right direction. So I haven't found it to be too complicated. If anything, I find like this is more complicated than the actual CSS sometimes. And then this isn't too bad as long as it's limited, but yeah. Okay, so let's talk about our function. And then we're going to start writing it once I get my notes, if I can find them. I know I have them. There we go. Got so many notes. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the function that we are going to create. Now, if anybody has ever worked with me, they will know right away, never, ever, ever send Alex data that looks like this, especially when you want him to analyze it, because he will scream. No, I'm just kidding. I'm not too bad about it, but I am kind of OCD about it. So this, this is stuff that drives me crazy. So I'm just going to give it some fake data just to make it look all nice and pretty, right? No, I'm just kidding. It's that new spill functionality. I love it. So normally, when it comes to storing data, for example, this is not the best way you should be storing data, because naturally, the thing is you would say it's not normalized, right? And the reason why is you basically kind of have a repeating field if you think about it, because, say, for example, I call this a year, this doesn't make a lot of sense to have each individual year on its own, because A, it's not very flexible as you add data. So if you're trying to reference that data set, it's not that you can't do it, it's just there's a much easier way to do it. And so naturally you would want to see something like this. This is what we would call normalized data, right? So 2001, 2002, 2003, right? So this is normally how you want to see it, because then each column is its own individual field, and it's kind of just, it's more defined, it's more structured, right? So you have your country, you have your year, and you have your value, your amount, whatever you want to call it. So normally this is how you want data sent to you, because this is kind of its flattened format. And so once it's flattened, you can pivot and do whatever you want with it. It's a lot harder to take pivoted data and then repivot it or normalize it again. In fact, this is actually such a popular feature that is built into Power Query, right? However, something that is basically drove me crazy throughout the years is there was really no way you could do this inside of Excel. There's no function that could do it. And I said, you know what? This is a great opportunity. We will show you how to write a function that will unpivot your data for you. So we're going to create an unpivot function. And with it, we will basically make your life a lot easier, ideally. So what you want to do is you want to jump into your function.ts file. And then inside of here, we are going to start creating our new function. So I'm actually going to copy this one right up here just to kind of give me a little starter point. And then the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to rename my function to unpivot. Okay. And then here we will give it basically a description. So unpivot a range of data into a normalized output. Something like that, right? Nothing too fancy, but enough to what it is. It's going to be a custom function, and we'll call it unpivot. And then it's going to take a few arguments, right? And so the first one, I'm going to just delete this for a second, is going to be any, and then it's going to be two little square brackets and then another square bracket set. This is saying it's going to be a range, right? So it's going to be a matrix that you're sending through to me. This is a matrix, a matrix, a matrix. So we're saying it's going to be a matrix. And then this one will be headers, the range of cells that represent the header values. All right, cool. And then we will do the next one and then the final one. Okay. The next one will be called rows and values. The range of cells that represent the row header values. I don't know, maybe you can call it something different. And then range of cells that represent the values. Okay, so that's going to be our three arguments. There's going to be headers, rows, and values. And it's going to return another matrix, right? So it's going to return another matrix. And this one will be the normalized range of cells. Now, very important that you note that I put any in front of it. I am making a very big assumption when somebody uses this function, which is I have no idea if they're going to give me text or they're going to give me numbers. And so if I don't know, I'm saying it's going to be anything. Notes up above, you will see a lot of the times they're very explicit. They say, oh, it's going to be numbers, it's going to be text. If you know the inputs, you should be specifying the input. In fact, it's highly encouraged to do that because naturally you don't want the user passing through a string if you're going to be performing math operations, because naturally it's going to fail. With this one though, it doesn't actually matter because all we're doing is we're taking that raw value and we're just simply kind of pivoting it. We're not changing the type, we're not doing any real operations on it. We're simply just reorganizing it into a more organized fashion. So at this point, we've defined our docstring that will then be used by Excel to, make our function, right? So once we've done that, we're going to start adding in our wonderful thing here. So we're going to say we're going to have headers. This will be any. And then we're going to have rows. And this will also be any. And then we'll have, and then I'm going to try to make it where you guys can see this. I don't care if this is squished right now, it doesn't matter. So we're going to have our rows, and then we're going to have our values. Our values, wow. And then again, it's going to be returning an any matrix, just like that. And there you go. So that's kind of our first thing. Congratulations, you just wrote part of your first function. And then from here, we need to start defining what our function is going to do, right? So we're passing through some items. Naturally, we're going to perform some operations. At least that would be the expectation. So we're going to first define an empty array to store our normalized rows as we create them. Now I'm being very generous with the documentation strings here, but hey, most people watch the tutorial. I'm assuming you want to have explanations. Okay, so the first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna define a new variable. We're gonna call it unpivot range, and it's gonna equal an empty array. We are then going to create another variable, and we're going to basically have this one where it initializes the count for the headers. Again, this will make more sense once we go through it. So we're gonna say let header count equal 0 biome. And then from here, we are going to start looping through our headers being here. Now, it's really, really, really important to understand a very big feature. Technically speaking, and I know this will confuse people. When you see this, you have to keep in mind, this is not a single list. This is a list of lists. So it's basically like I'm having 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, right? So this is really a list of lists. So what I need to do is I need to loop through each element in that nested list, right? So imagine we're back in our Python days, right? How do we access that inner list? We access that inner list by indexing it or slicing it, right? So by slicing it, what we do is we index it with 0. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to say headers, and then it's going to be 0. So I want the first item in that list. Well, that's just a list. And then we're going to do for each. And then it's going to be value, and then it's going to be equal, and then that little arrow sign, and then our squirrely brackets. So take the first row out of that list and loop through each element in that row, right? So we'll say let row count equal 0. So we're going to initialize our row count. And then this one is loop through each element in the row header. Okay. And then from here, we have a row. Okay, so now we're going to say loop through each row in the rows collection or matrix, whatever you want to call it. But now what we're going to start doing is we're going to loop through each one of these rows. So that one's kind of like this, where it's going to be, 1, and then it's going to be 2, and then it's going to be 3, right? So again, it's just important to understand how this is all structured, because that will really, really dictate, how you're looping through it. And we're going to say for each, and then it's going to be row element, and then equal arrow, and then it's going to be same thing again. So at this point, though, we actually need to do something, which is initialize our new row. And so we're going to say let new row equal an empty array. And then what we'll do is we'll start appending values to it. So now we're going to start grab all the values. So we're going to say, okay, so new row 0. So the first element in our new row will be the value. And so remember, value is up here. So basically that's going to be our header, right? Our header. And then we're going to have new row 1 is going to equal row element 0. And so in this case, if I did that, it would be this, right? So now it's going to be our row value. And then it's going to be new row 2. And that's going to equal our values, the row count, and then the header count. So as I'm looping through, I should be able to get each one of these values. That's what this guy's doing right here. Honestly, I don't think there's an easy way to explain this one. It's just confused. I still look at it and I still have to like take a second and like, okay, so I'm looping through that. I'm looping through that. I don't think you can I mean, some people I'm sure are probably gonna look and like, oh, I get it right away. Some people are gonna go like, I don't get it. You can be like me then, who's gonna look at it and still be confused. And I wrote the thing, for God's sakes. And then we're gonna add to the main array. So we're gonna say unpivot range, push, and then new row. And then we'll do that. So now we've added it, and then we got to just basically clean up, which is, you know, start incrementing +1. And then we're gonna have to increment the header count as well. So we'll say header count, and that equals +1. And then at the end of all this, what we want to do is we want to return our unpivot range. And then we'll format our document. And then we'll see what happens. I don't think you have to build it, but I'll see in a second. Oh, good, there it is. So now we have our wonderful thing. And so this is actually kind of neat too, because we'll maximize it. You can actually go, and now you can see everything about it. Isn't that cool? I thought that was so neat. So now you can basically create custom functions and then give some components to it where it's easy, you know, just to do it. So now let's see what our unpivoted data looks like, right? Assuming it works. Never works, right? Oh, that's right. I have to build it first. Hold on. So this is one of those things where you have to, oh wait, sorry. npm run build. So this is something where you have to build it first, and then you should see it when it goes in. Assuming everything works correctly. Cool. So that's what you want to see, ideally. Then what I like to do is I like to reload it just to be safe. And then we'll do sigma pivot. And then we'll do our headers. And then look at that. Pretty cool, right? So now you have each one of these little things. And I think that is so neat, because normally you have to go into Power Query and do this yourself. Not anymore. You can now do it just like that. Just like that, you have a nice little unpivot function. Share it with your friends, right? Nah, I'm just kidding. Now I'm gonna find out that there's probably something out there that already does it, but I thought it was neat. So that is now a custom function that we've built, and it's taking a range of cells and it's doing something with it. So I think the only thing I think I probably should have changed, because now I'm looking at it, I'm going like, wait a minute, did I do something? I think country should go first. So I would switch these two, because I think that makes a little bit more sense. I mean, I guess it doesn't really matter. I guess you could, if you technically cheated, you could technically do this. Actually, I don't know if that would work. Yeah, I don't think that would work because I didn't write it to where it's dynamic enough to do that. I tried. Okay, but yeah, I think that's actually, oh yeah, that's plenty of time. So yeah, at this point, I think I'm gonna cut it off with this video, but now we have modified our task pane. We are starting to explore a little bit more of the CSS, and now we've also added some custom functions to our wonderful add-in to just solve everyday problems that most of us suffer with. Now, the next big thing that I'm sure a lot of us have dealt with in the past, which is, have we ever gotten data where it's been like this, right? And something along, you know, and you got to do that, you know, text to column split thing, right? That's always been a pain. And the other big problem with text to column was it only did one character. what if we could write a function that kind of acts like Power Query where you can put in your own custom delimiter? That would be kind of interesting, right? Remember this one, where is it? This one, text to column. Notice how it had that comma aspect? This is normally what you do, but you always had to have a single character and all that, or else it didn't work. Well, now what we'll do is we'll show you how to create your own custom function that will split text on a custom delimiter. So that's what we're going to do next. And then we'll also start binding some functionality to some of our buttons. So that's some other interesting stuff that we have coming up. However, again, if you have any questions, by all means, ask away. Otherwise, we will see you in our next video.